Hello everyone, and welcome to this graphite techniques video. And I thought that I would go ahead and do the next step in our leaf on the Monoprint project, so you had something more to work on. Really, it's exactly the same steps that we used in our pear. So we started with the big picture outline. We refined our form. We filled in with direction of form to lose the outline. And now we're ready to remove highlights. And so you probably remember that we use a kneaded eraser for this. I'm going to clean mine by kneading it because it gets dirty. I just want to get a nice clean surface area to work with. Okay, so now I have a clean kneaded eraser, and I'm going to form the end in sort of a tip. And I'm going to look at my leaf, and quite honestly, it's not very highlighted, really. There's a few, but I do want to lift those in my leaf project. So I'm going to look, and I don't know if you can see it here, but I see a little bit of highlight along this bottom edge of this section. So I'm going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm just pressing it on the graphite along that line. Okay, and I can add more later, but I just kind of want to give it that disappearing edge that I see. Then I see a little bit over here, so I'm going to press my eraser here to lift the graphite. Now, your leaf is going to be completely different than mine, so you really need to look and see where those highlights are. You might have a much shinier leaf. Mine's kind of dull, so it's not really shiny. But I am lifting out a little bit where I see it. Not too much. A little bit down here. And I see some textural marks that are a little bit lighter, and I'll work on those when we're adding our details. So that's really about all that I see on mine, maybe just a little bit down here. So I've removed some graphite to lift out the highlights that I do see. The next step is to add in the darker areas. So I can use a couple of pencils for this. I'm going to use my HB a little bit where it's not too dark, and then I'm also going to go to my 5B for where it's darker. And I think I'll start with the HB. And I'm just going to look around my leaf and see where I see any areas that are a bit darker on my leaf. So I do notice that this little piece is darker. I want to make sure I've got those little ends marked in. It's a little bit darker here, so I'm just using little hatch marks, leaving that white space. I also see a little bit over here. And a little bit right in here. A little bit along this edge. And then as it comes down, there's a little bit of a kink in it, so I'm going to add some dark there where I see it. There. So I'm going to turn the video off and go to time lapse and finish adding in my dark areas. so I went over the whole leaf with my HB pencil, adding in some darkness where I see it. And now I'm going to use my 5B, and I'm going to go over again in the darkest places. So I'm always using direction of form. And I'm also going to pay attention to my center vein now. And where I see dark right next to it, I'm going to add that in with my 5B pencil. So on my leaf, from my perspective here, the right side of that center vein is a little bit darker. And then I'm just using little circular motions with my pencil. And it's also darker on the right side of the secondary vein. So I can sort of snug up that white area. My vein isn't terribly light. It gets a little lighter here and then darker over here. And darker here. Definitely darker down here where it meets the stem. Now my stem's fairly light until I come down here to the bottom. And then it's quite a bit darker down here, and it's got a little bit of darkness right in this area. Over in here. Just along this edge where it curls up. Also remember that the view I have might be a little different than the view you have, but basically what you're doing is you're going around the leaf and adding in darkness where you see it. So where it's in a little bit of shadow, I'm not really talking about the details on the leaf, the markings and stuff, but where you see it being a little bit in shadow. Snugging up those center vein lines. And then just here on the edge, I've got a little bit of darkness. I'm pretty happy with that. My leaf is dark, but it's not that dark. So I don't want to do too much. So now that I revealed the highlights, I put in some darker colors, I'm going to take my, my stick eraser and I'm going to start lifting out some areas where I see that it's really light. I'm going to sharpen my stick eraser. If you have a Tombow, you can take a chisel point to it just to sort of clean it up a little bit. And I'm just going to lift out just some areas here and there where I see these little light spots. I don't know if they're mold or what it is exactly. But there's also some dark within those light spots. So I'm just lifting out the light part now. Sorry, I had a phone call. So I'm just using my stick eraser to lift out these areas where I see the textural markings. Okay, and I also noticed that my stem's a little lighter right here. So I'm just lightly removing some graphite there. So now I have the beginnings of some of those textural markings, okay? So the next thing I want to do is I want to take my hard pencil, which is my 2H, and I'm going to go over the entire leaf in direction of form and sort of smooth together the dark and the light. So it's almost like, and also snugging up those veins. So it's almost like I'm using it as a blending tool. So I'm just sort of going over it in direction of form. And anywhere where I see that the transitions aren't really smooth, I'm just sort of using this hard pencil in between the two to bring some unity. Almost like a blending stick. But it's adding just a deposit of graphite. I can really snug up edges. Make sure my edges are nice and crisp. So it's not really changing what I have below, but it's sort of softening and unifying. It's a very hard pencil, so it doesn't add a lot of graphite, but it does smooth things over a little bit. Okay, before I move on, I want to go along those center veins and make sure that I've got one side is nice and crisp, because I do see a line on my leaf. Your veins could look entirely different, but I want the sort of a crisp line on one side. There. Make sure one side of my stem isn't really nice like that. Okay, so now that that is done, now I can go in probably with my 5B pencil, and I'm going to stop the video for a second to make sure it's very, very sharp, because we're going to go in with the very sharpest tip of our dark pencil and put some of those really dark details in. Okay, so I basically made sure that the point of my 5B pencil is really, really sharp, and now I'm going to get into this nitty-gritty work. And I'm going to go very slowly, and I'm going to start at the tips and make sure I have this very defined line where these tiny little tendrils come out. I'm going along that vein where I see it a little bit darker. If I see any other little veins, I can pull them through. Tiny little marks. These are the darkest bits that we see. If I see any little spots, like where I've made these outlines, I'm just sort of using a stippling motion to add some little dots in where I see them. Sometimes the very edge of the leaf, it's a little bit darker. I can just hatch those down. So you see, I'm just using very, very small marks, combing over my leaf, and just adding in little bits of detail where I notice them. And this is slow work, and it doesn't have to be exactly like your leaf, but you'll notice things about it as you comb over it, and you can just sort of add suggestions. Just tiny little marks. I might see some extra veins that I can just lightly notate with my pencil. So I'm kind of quiet because I'm really focusing. I'm using a very, very light touch. Every leaf you do will be a little bit different. And this is what I call intuitive mark making, because there's not a name for this really, what I'm doing. I'm just moving along, making sure that if there's anything about this specific leaf that's different, I'm trying to add it in. Just some tiny little marks here and there. Much darker on the bottom. Now, this part here is standing out to me as a little bit dark, so I want to take my 2H pencil again and using direction of form, try to blend those two together. It's not so dramatic. So when you do this, it's darkening the dark parts as well as the light parts. Same over here. There. Okay. So really, this can be it for me. I feel like I've got a good representation of this leaf. If I take this one away now, and look what I have here, and sort of hold it up, I can see an oak leaf here. I might continue to go over and make some darker places, even a little bit darker, just to give it that little bit of extra darkness that sometimes I'll add to areas where it might need just a little bit of help. There. Anything over here? I think I need to go a little bit darker along this vein because it's showing up. And then there were some little auxiliary veins that came out. And just circular motions just to darken up this area. Just a little bit. Okay. I am going to lighten up this area just a tad with my eraser. Just overall, just give it sort of that disappearing edge that I saw. And I'm really happy with that. So this is basically the same, these are the same steps that we use for our pear. You know, when we do our leaves, every leaf will be different, but the main thing is learning to use a monoprint background to make our drawings a little bit more interesting. Now, one final thing, you can decide to put a shadow under your leaf if you want to. Typically I don't, okay, but I am going to show you if you do want to do that. So our shadow here is quite a bit darker than my leaf, and I'll just put it right next to it. I'm going to use this as my example. And so I see, like, this part of the leaf raises up a bit, so there's a little bit of a shadow here. I can just add in a little bit of a shadow. And then over here, underneath this light edge, there is a shadow, so I can put a really dark line where I see it, and then it kind of comes out this way. And then I'll use a blending stick just to soften it right up next to that edge. And then just soften it out a little bit. And down here there's a shadow, so this comes up, so the shadow would go underneath. And then the stem shadow comes right alongside. It gets lighter and then it gets darker again down here. And then I would use my blending stick to soften that shadow right up underneath, and then soften the stem shadow. And it's a little bit lighter than that, so I'll take my eraser and then just go over it just lightly to soften it. So just a tiny bit of a shadow, and it lost it a bit there. So I'll just take my blending stick and go over it again. Make sure that that line is crisp. So that's that. And then there's a little bit of a shadow on this side. Kind of comes up to there. Same thing, use my blending stick just to soften it up into the leaf. And then over here, there's a little bit. And same thing. And I see a tiny bit of a shadow over here. There. So that's a little bit of a shadow if you wanted to do that. I typically don't do that. I guess when I do more realistic things, I do it more in the botanical style, which usually does not have cast shadows on it. But if you wanted to, I want to show you how to do it. In fact, this one probably might be a little bit darker. And you know, you can keep fussing with it until you feel like it's representational of what you're seeing here. So that's really it. And I hope that you'll try this. I hope you'll do it a couple of times. Excuse me. And please share your work so I can see, and ask me any questions that you might have. All right, I hope you all are having a great day. And I'm gonna try to get 3 videos done this week so you have things while I'm sort of away next week. Hopefully I'm back by the end of the week next week. All right, take care and thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.